Hey everyone, it's Brian, and today we're going to talk about a topic that you're generally warned away from at family gatherings, namely politics. How people are governed is a critically important topic for the geographer. Latin America has gone through incredible changes to its political structure throughout history, many of which are still colored by the past and actively changing today. So, let's look into these systems in Latin America. Part 1. The Age of Revolutions. In previous lessons, we've talked about the conquest and colonization of the Americas by Spain, France, England, and others. For several hundred years, European domination of Latin America seemed unassailable, but revolution was in the wind. From 1808 through 1830, a wave of independence movements occurred throughout Latin America. But before we talk about the liberation movements and their impact, let's explore the 4 big reasons for them to occur. Revolution Reason 1: Favoritism and Prejudice. Those people who were of Spanish descent but born in one of Spain's colonies were called criollos. While given much higher status over other groups, if you'll remember the mestizos and mulatto groups from another lesson, criollos were still not allowed to hold positions in the government. This, combined with a total prejudice against anyone not purely Spanish, caused a large amount of resentment. If your government has no one like you in it, then they tend to not make decisions which help you. Revolution Reason 2: Trade restrictions. Again, while most people in the Latin American colonies had no connection to the global trade economy, those who did were restricted from selling to other countries. If they could sell, then taxes on those items were very high. These conditions made it almost impossible for people in the colonies to make a living, as the colonial country could set the price on all goods all the time. Revolutionary Reason 3: The American Revolution. The shot heard around the world wasn't just a joke when used to describe the opening shots of the American Revolution at Lexington and Concord. Across the world and in Latin America, the simple act of rebellion against a colonial power, and for many of the same resentments held by those under the rule of Spain and Portugal, proved to be incredibly inspiring. That the American colonies won added even more to the once faint idea that perhaps Latin American countries could also chart their own destiny. Revolutionary Reason 4: War in Europe. Just after the American Revolution, another one occurred in France. However, it largely ended in chaos, and from that chaos arose a man named Napoleon Bonaparte. From 1803 to 1815, Europe was heavily focused on stopping the rise of Napoleon and was focused far less on its colonies and overseas territories. This neglect, combined with the distraction of a European conflict, allowed for many revolutionary movements to grow unchecked until they were too large to stop. Whew! Well, now that we know why, let's talk about the revolutions themselves. Toussaint Louverture's slave revolt in Haiti. Stratification of society and incredibly harsh conditions led to a massive slave uprising in Haiti in 1791. Later, under the leadership of Toussaint Louverture, a former slave and army officer, the slave revolt managed to throw out the French colonial government and institute self-rule. This is not only an example in the Americas of a revolution being successfully carried out primarily by slaves, but is additionally historically important as those former slaves created their own country in 1804. Simón Bolívar, the father of Latin America, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, and Venezuela. Also called El Libertador, or the Liberator, Simón Bolívar was born in Caracas to a wealthy family and sent to be educated in Europe. While there, he learned of the Enlightenment principles of freedom and liberty. When he returned home, he led a revolution against the Spanish-controlled government of Venezuela, which at the time also included the present-day countries of Colombia and Panama. From there, he led revolutions to liberate the countries of Ecuador, part of Peru, and Bolivia, the country which is named for him. Bolívar is widely recognized in history as the prime mover and symbol of native colonial rebellion in Latin America. José de San Martín, Argentina, Chile, and Peru. Another son of a wealthy family, this time from Argentina, José de San Martín was raised in and fought for the military in Spain. After his service in Spain, the figure of San Martín becomes a bit controversial, as some claim he heard of his home Argentina rising in rebellion and felt a duty to join, while others claim that England paid several Spanish officers to return to Argentina, as the breakup of Spanish colonies would be advantageous for them. Either way, San Martín joined up with the revolutionary forces and eventually helped to win control of Argentina. He marched across the Andes Mountains with the Army of the Andes, which is something akin to a Washington crossing the Delaware level event in southern South America, in order to help Chile, and then took control of Lima, effectively liberating all of Peru. Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla, Mexico. In many ways, the crown jewel of the Spanish-American Empire, Mexico's road to independence had starts and stops, but the inspiration that Mexico looks to is Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. A priest born in Mexico, he at first tried to assist the poor by training them to grow their own food, which was discouraged by the Spanish government due to the conflict that it would create with the trade from Spain. In a famous speech called Grito de Dolores, or the Cry of Dolores, Father Hidalgo y Costilla called the common people to arms. His army of common people defeated a few forces and marched to Mexico City until they met up with an organized military and were scattered. Father Hidalgo y Costilla was betrayed and executed in 1811, but his call for the common people to rise up and be free was echoed as another man, Agustín de Iturbide, rode into Mexico City triumphantly in 1821, bringing an end to colonial rule in Mexico. Problems. Now, recalling the reasons for revolution given earlier, while these revolutions did liberate much of Latin America from colonial rule, for many people, very little changed. While the elite in power were no longer Spanish-born, they were usually all criollos, the upper crust of native-born society. Think about the backgrounds of all the liberators, wealthy men who had power and prestige already, and by and large, the elite continued to rule. Trade for goods and services still primarily went to and came from the former colonial powers, and while the trade deals might have been slightly better, again, the common people usually saw very little change. Of course, when one military leader can rise up and seize power, it also gives other military leaders the same idea. Latin American countries would see a number of military figures rise up and seize control for the next 150 years or more. Attempts at reform and USA involvement. Acknowledging this lack of change, some reform attempts have been made over the years, including the 1917 Constitution of Mexico, which enumerated or wrote out the rights of citizens and gave the federal government more power to craft land reform changes. The Cuban Communist Revolution of 1959, arguably the greatest change represented in these examples, was a reaction against a wealthy elite allowing outside influences to utilize most of Cuba's resources and land. This revolution resulted in a completely new form of government, a new economic system, and a completely different approach to foreign policy, all of which still carries on to the present day. And as mentioned before, a series of military leaders taking power at numerous times in reaction for or against popular reform. There are, unfortunately, numerous examples, but those which have definitely made a mark in Latin America history include Anastasio Somoza Garcia. For over 50 years, he and then two of his sons effectively treated Nicaragua as their own private estate. They had the support of Western governments because of their anti-communist stance. Augusto Pinochet, another man who rose to power by putting down anyone with supposed communist leanings. Pinochet ruled Chile from 1973 to 1998. Manuel Noriega. From 1983 to 1989, Noriega ran Panama as a military dictator. From the 1950s, through his rise as leader, he worked for the United States CIA, funneling material for Latin American operations, and also amassing a personal fortune running a drug cartel. A U.S. invasion of Panama in 1989 toppled his regime. François Papadoc Duvalier. In 1957, this trained medical doctor won the presidential election in Haiti and then declared himself president for life in 1961. Using brutal methods, he sustained himself in power until his death in 1971 and then paved the way for his son, Jean-Claude Duvalier, known as Baby Doc, to succeed him until he was overthrown in 1986. During the 20th century, countries such as Brazil, Nicaragua, and Guatemala have attempted some broader democratic reforms, with uncertain results, especially in the cases of Nicaragua and Guatemala, whose efforts have been frustrated by the drug trade and control of international gangs within those countries. USA involvement. United States involvement in Latin America has something of a troubling history and is largely driven by two pieces of U.S. policy. First is the Monroe Doctrine. In 1821, just after most Latin American colonies became independent, President James Monroe declared that if European nations again decided to interfere in the Western Hemisphere, that it might be taken as an act of aggression against the United States as well. And the second is the Truman Doctrine. In 1947, President Harry Truman developed the idea of containing communism after World War II so that it would not spread to other countries. With these two policies, the United States has involved itself in numerous political conflicts in South America. In the nations of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, and Venezuela, the United States government or its clandestine service have had a part in helping to prop up, replace, or support a governmental structure that cannot be defined as strictly democratic over the last 100 years. However, the largest scale and most visible operations by the United States in Latin America aimed to stem the flow of illegal drugs from all over the world into the United States, which remains, to the present day, the largest market for illegal drugs in the world. Called the War on Drugs, multiple financial, military, and political operations in the countries of Colombia, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico were aimed at stopping the production and distribution of drugs. Some of these operations were able to disrupt large drug cartels, such as the Sinaloa cartel of Mexico, just as many of these operations have met with limited success and uncertainty over their outcomes. Additionally, the southern border of the United States, which is the northern border of Mexico, has been politically consequential now and again dating back to the 1940s over the number and status of migrants attempting to enter the U.S. via Mexico. The Bracero Worker Visa Program, running from 1942 to 1964, brought hundreds of thousands of people from Mexico to the U.S., primarily as farm workers. The border was largely closed off with the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, where the federal government illegalized hiring immigrant workers and imposed stiff fines for violations. The DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival Executive Order, was enacted in 2012 to protect the status of undocumented people who arrived in the U.S. as minors, and most recently, the Immigration Control Order of 2017 placed another set of restrictions on movement of immigrants across the U.S.-Mexico border. This is a small sampling of the many different derivations of policies about the U.S.-Mexico border, and consequently, this remains a hot-button political issue to the present day. In future lessons, we'll dig deeper into the regional distinctions and fascinating features which set so much of Latin America apart from other places around the world. But keep in mind these broad political ideas as we continue our study. Until next time, keep exploring.
Hey!